Good day, everybody. Welcome to Building the Black Educator Pipeline podcast. I am your host, Shana Terrell, educator activist dedicated to the lifelong struggle of freedom and liberation for my people. What's up out there, everybody? Shout out to my co-conspirators out there that continue to like, subscribe, watch, join. We so appreciate you. And thank you for joining us for another episode. And shout out to my new supporters. If this is your first time listening to us, welcome on in the room and to this co-conspirator collab. We appreciate you guys. Right now, we are up on all platforms, so make sure you follow or subscribe and listen. You can find us on all major platforms like Apple, Spotify, Amazon. Please drop a rating if you like what you're hearing. And if you don't, keep it to yourself. Psych, no. If you like us, definitely rate us. Major shout out to Brightbeam and the Center for Black Educator Development for providing us with this platform to talk to real people in the real struggle, doing the real work. Today's theme, y'all, is building a Black educator pipeline and liberatory curriculum. Today, we will be focusing on liberatory education. We're excited to welcome our very own Ansharaye Hines of the Center for Black Educator Development and Brandon White of Maya Claude LLC. They will be joining us today to discuss the creation of the LeCount-Catto Curriculum that we are using right now in some of our programs at CBED. We'll also be discussing the importance of liberatory education. So, hey, y'all, welcome to the show. I'm so excited that you both are here.
Yes, it is a thrill to be here. So finally, we've made it after listening. I've been in the shadows, listening in the comments, tracking y'all. So to be here today is just like a dream.
Yes, excited to have you. Yes. Shout out to you too, Brother Brandon, for joining us.
No doubt. Same here. I even made sure my knuckles weren't ashy and had everything right and exact. See how I'm flexing my hydrated knuckles in the screen? Like, boom. Yes.
You know what I'm
saying? Like, it's a special moment. It's a special moment, Shana. Special moment.
We've come a long way.
It's definitely a special moment. You know, you was coming on here, I was thinking, like, do I bust on Brandon being ashy or no? And you know what? Since you brought it up, yes, shout out to you for coming on here. Moisturize, okay? Moisturize for the people to talk about Black liberatory education, y'all. Moisturizing your skin is Black liberation. Don't forget it, all right?
Dehydration is liberation. I'm only here as an assimilationist for the anti-hydration, the anti-hydration environment that's here.
Yes, Brandon. Brandon, go off, okay? But shout out to you for being hydrated. So listen, y'all, welcome. Can y'all please, Ansharaye, we'll start with you. Just tell our guests a little bit about yourself and your current work.
Sure. So I work in high school programming. I think that's the easiest way to simplify what I do at the Center for Black Educator Development. This work is something that's really important to me because my journey into education started through being a part of Freedom Schools, through being a junior servant leader, through being mentored by the folks who are in the Freedom School space, including but not limited to Dr. Greg Carr, who's a frequent guest. So again, I'm just really excited to be here and to be spending time with y'all. Of course, we're going to talk more about Liberation Academy, what it does, but my responsibility to the center and really, I think, to the community is to participate in like building that programming that really motivated me to be a part of education and really was formative in my character and my values regarding my responsibility to community, the purpose of education, the reason why we participate in this, and the impact that education has when it's done well. Just the human development that's a part of that process is something that we try to develop through Liberation Academy. So I don't want to, I'll just leave it there because I know we have like more conversation to get into, but I'm just excited to be here.
Shout out to you. And Brother Brandon, could you please talk to us and share with the folks a little bit about yourself and your current work?
Yeah, well, currently through my consultancy, Maya Claude, Teaching and Learning, had the honor and privilege to be working with y'all on the LeCount-Catto Curriculum, right? Co-coordinating and co-contributing to that. And that's been an honor and pleasure and just a knowledge expander for myself. But also, I work as an ELA specialist for Unbound Ed, and the experiences that I had that led to that were being a ELA teacher for middle school in the Rochester City School District and a servant leader intern and site coordinator for 2 different Freedom School sites. So it was awesome to interact with y'all, Seabed folk. Ansharaye, forgive me for saying Seabed, but Seabed folk, yeah, she don't like it. I know CBED is just so many more sounds. But anyway,
it's a lot more syllables. Yeah,
it was dope to see my Philly folks also be cut from a similar cloth and work to be able to work on this. So I'm excited to be here, and not just in this podcast, which I've been a fan of, but like in the space working with y'all.
Amazing. So usually, right, when we're talking to our guests, we feel like it's important for our co-conspirators and our supporters out there to hear about your journey in education and what inspires you to be an educator. So I would love for you guys to tell us a little bit about that. What inspired you to be an educator? Ansharaye, we can start with you.
Yeah. I mentioned moments ago that Freedom School was really part of the reason why I got involved in this work. And it was through learning about the purpose of education, like the real drive that held the educational process together. That process being deeper than the giving somebody some sort of like accreditation or something that is going to be the gold star in their head, that now they have the certificate, they've been credentialized to go out into the world, which is not really what this enterprise is supposed to be about. Like, if education is about human development, then it involves really collaborating with the communities that the people who you are educating come from. It involves really having consideration for that person's humanity. And it involves like an adherence to a certain set of like values, but also just like communal knowledge, historical knowledge, cultural knowledge, all those things that are really going to help that young person or that grown person who's engaging in the educational process carry on the work that they're meant to do into the future. Your education, and this is all like stuff that I am downloading through what was poured into me through Freedom School, but your education is really, when it's done well, is a lot more closely aligned to helping you realize your destiny and your purpose. It's not about like the job or like the money. It's about how you as a human being evolve to your highest self as a human being. And when I thought about that as a young person, the experience that I was getting in Freedom School was that. And it was way beyond what I was getting when I was in high school in Philadelphia, going to one of like the best, quote unquote, high schools in the city. That space being really encumbered by oppression and like structural racism, et cetera, being able to be around Black people who were going to pour into me and also think of me as somebody who was taking on the mantle of our whole community and all of the heritage that came with that into the future, just really endowed me with the thought that like, this is work that I need to do with my life because I care about what's going to happen to us. I'm invested in making sure that whoever's coming after me is going to be able to thrive beyond what I had the opportunity to do. So that involved a lot of rigorous intellectual work. That involved a lot of questioning and evolution of myself and thinking about what I really wanted to do and how I was using my time and what I was doing all over the place. It was a transformative experience. So that is how I got into education. That was kind of, I went kind of around the bush, but hopefully I answered your question.
You went around, up and through it. What you pointed out to us is like, though you were experiencing what you were experiencing in these oppressive spaces, having a sacred space with Black folks who loved you and poured into you is what pushed you into the space and journey of education, because you wanted to make sure you were doing that for the next generation. So you took us there, sis. We got
okay,
you.
Cool.
We got you.
Trying to stay on point.
We had you. Brandon, cool. We would love to hear about your journey to becoming an educator. What inspired you to get into education?
I think hip hop. Well, one, the foundation that my parents laid for both of them having like knowledge and service related kind of jobs. And then discovering in high school that the things that I was learning in my ELA class, my favorite MCs were doing, but it wasn't always talked about. And so I think the first idea of being like, other people can know this. Other people can make the same kind of comparisons that I made or connections that I made. But then the firm decision to become an educator came when I kind of I started really understanding that whole section of Frederick Douglass's life where he talks about where he was learning to read from a mistress of his owner. And then the owner is like, if you teach a nigger to read, they'll spoil the best nigger in the world. And then I was like, okay, this is what I need to be doing. Like clearly literacy or lack of literacy in the English language, pardon me, I want to make that clear, is a major reason why we are in the situations that we're in, and starting to understand how that was something that he really didn't want us to have and still don't in large regard. That was something where I was like, bet this is what I'm going to do. If I'm not rhyming, I'm teaching. and so that's kind of how I ended up where I was. And then things like Freedom School only triple affirmed it, right? And not affirmed it, but sharpened it. And, that's just where I've been since.
Yeah, and we do both. We rhyme and we teach.
Yep,
I was going to say, shout out to MC B. White, the Ashy rapper.
Yes.
And shout out to MC.
Side note, I ran
DJ Shay.
I ran a club when I was teaching called Chess Rhymes and Wisdom. And their nickname for me, I never told y'all this. As a my rapper name was Ashy White. because I was always so ashy. Yeah, I didn't reveal that to y'all. Yeah, Ashy White. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Shout out to Jessica Ortiz if she remembers
out of control.
That. Yeah.
Okay.
Jessica Figueroa that gave me that name, Ashy White. Yep.
That is a disaster.
You know what, Jessica Figueroa? You knew what you was doing, honey.
Yeah.
You heard it. Oh, Ashy White out here.
Love that brother. Where is the journey?
Well, shout out to both of y'all. Definitely amazing stories and how you were inspired to be educators. But at the heart of it, I definitely hear your connection to young people and your connection to the struggle, giving back what they stole from us and what they don't want us to have. So shout out to y'all for choosing education. Now let's get into the work. So y'all are doing some serious work for the center out here. Ooh. Y'all are doing some real work for the center out here. You guys are working on the nickname. It's LCC, but the full name is the LeCount-Catto Curriculum. What is that? Can you tell us a little bit about what the LeCount-Catto Curriculum is?
Yes. So I started to talk about Liberation Academy, which is our during the school year programming that we hold for high school students. And the LeCount-Catto Curriculum is a component of that and is really designed to do a number of different things. The spirit of it, like some of the pillars that really drive it, are this idea of communal learning, like learning that is connected to community, but also this idea that's counter the rampant like individualism and the spirit of capitalism that permeates like the learning process, where it's like about your individual merit and your individual success. We try to generate a spirit of community building through the curriculum and through whatever we're doing in Liberation Academy that emphasizes that we are learning together. We're learning together intentionally, and that learning is a collective communal process that takes intentional development through time. And it's something that will only be effective if we do it together. So that is one component, just to give you like some idea of what Liberation Academy spaces are like. But the LeCount-Catto Curriculum itself is really grounded in the junior servant leader, one of our grounding rules, which is to be present within the space of like understanding the current context, which in this case is education. How did education really come to be what it is right now? What are the factors that led to that? And what are like the roots of how education became what we are currently looking at? But then thinking beyond that, being present throughout like the history of time and space, not to be all mystical, but like going back to fundamentally the process that people of African descent engaged when they were thinking about what it looks like to pass on knowledge. Before there even had to be a consideration of liberation, we were free to do what we self-determined ourselves to do. What was that education process like? What were the objectives? How do we start to look back at the values that were held in that space and the way that people operate when they are free, and think about what can be reiterated in the present so that we can practice freedom as self-determined human beings today, but also use whatever tools necessary in order to engage with the current oppressive reality and resist that. So we do a whole lot throughout the curriculum. The curriculum itself is 2 years long, but the reiteration with every unit and every lesson is based on those principles and that idea. What does it mean to really be a liberated human being in this current context? What does it feel like to be able to really stand on the historical processes that our ancestors have established for us and our elders have trained us in? And then how do we use that in order to create a better reality?
So, Brendan, would you like to add to that? I know it was a lot to take in and download.
No, I mean, like,
Going.
no, Hines, I echo everything that she just said. And as she was explaining it, it made me think, like, if I were to, like, sum it up, I feel like the curriculum is designed to help folks understand what to avoid, what to embrace, what to learn, and what to unlearn in order to be a liberatory educator. You know, these are things that I feel like,
I like that.
In many cases, we kind of, particularly as like Africans in America, we tend to fall into education. Like, we happen to come across the right people, the right institutions, the right realizations to be like, hey, you know what, this is probably something I want to do, or we have the right privileges. But many of us aren't afforded that. And I think it's about expanding and being intentional about expanding that privilege, right? By creating a curriculum that does those things that Hines identified.
Yeah. And Brendan, what you said just now made me think of some of the students that we currently have in Liberation Academy, and thinking about that unlearning process and that identification. Like, once they have that awareness, it's like, oh no, like, this is oppressive. You are oppressing me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You are in my way. Like, you are not here to help me. And they're not, like, that light coming on is is bittersweet, you know, because you are thankful that the students that you have and care about are now equipped to face what's going on around them. But also it's that realization of, like, I've been harmed, you know, like, there were people in my space around me who did not mean my highest good in the space that is supposed to be for my highest development. And that's rough. But what they are encouraged to do beyond that is start to act like, no, we can't, this is not going to happen to my little cousin, or this is not going to happen to the grade after me. Like, now we need to, like, mobilize in order to do something different. But that process is definitely real and felt as we are going through this.
And I love you guys' description. I do want to shout out Ansharaye. I know you said it's 2 years, but we will be extending out to 3 years. Okay.
Yes.
To get
for
the
sure.
curriculum properly from the intro.
Constant development.
But definitely hinted always developing and growing out here at the center.
For sure.
To take over. But
The break's over. Come on.
hinted to what you guys said, especially talking about the curriculum, is almost like an awakening. And I always use, one of our taglines is liberating education. Mm-hmm. And what you guys are doing with the curriculum shows, like, kind of the dual edges of a liberating education. Literally, through the curriculum and just writing this curriculum period, you are liberating education, right? Because it's a different form of learning and curriculum that's being put in front of children. So literally breaking the shackles of what they are normally or generally taught, but also the children being liberated themselves through education, seeing all of these things that are wrong within the current system that they're within, that they're expected to just accept, and seeing that and liberating their minds now, in a sense, to go forth and kind of fight and change things. So I love what LeCount-Catto Curriculum is doing. LeCount-Catto, excuse me. Now, people are like, LeCount-Catto, like, what is that name and who is that, right? Like, but the curriculum is named after Carolyn LeCount and Octavius Catto. So one of you want to take a stab at telling the people who these beautiful, intelligent, and powerful human beings were and why we chose to name the curriculum after them.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and start
Thank you,
conversation. Hines. I mean, this. No, I got you. We in this together. So, when you think about people who were really like about it, people who I'm thinking about, again, mentioning like ancestors and people who were doing the work before we even stepped on the scene, people who were thinking about me and my arrival before I was even here. So those two people, Octavius Catto and Caroline LeCount, were people who were formative in thinking about what education for people of African descent in America would look like. And they were doing that in the birthplace of America, Philadelphia, where all of these, around the same time as like the ideas for what this country would be, were being sown, like right after we did all this Declaration of Independence and Emancipation, et cetera, et cetera. These were two people who were invested in education for Black communities in Philadelphia and were really concerned about intentional education of Black children by other Black people. Now, this is an idea that usually gets attributed to people coming around like, oh, in the 60s and 70s, we got Black power, do this, do that. We got to have purposeful Black education. But they were thinking about this in the early 1800s. Like, we need to be able to train educators who are going to intentionally serve, intentionally develop, and be there for young Black students. But even beyond, so like they were, both of them attended, graduated from, and then taught at the Institute for Colored Youth, which would eventually become Cheyney University. But beyond that, like they were doing the educational work, but they were also engaged in community. And that fundamental through line, I think, is part of what a lot of educational institutions lose, like the education being tangible, but also just remaining connected to community so that education is something that impacts the people around us beyond the walls. You know, so they were, Octavius Catto was a real one, as the people like to say. Like he stayed strapped. I don't know if there's an easier way to say that, but he believed in self-defense, like was about that. He helped to organize like a regiment of Black soldiers. He helped to organize like a baseball team in Philadelphia and was like an athlete. He was organizing with Caroline LeCount, who was also his fiance, to be transparent. They organized in order to desegregate the streetcars in Philadelphia, like both of them working on development of curriculum and development of all these things, voting rights. They were engaged in that struggle, but just moving together in tandem together, like goals, okay, like
power couple,
a real one like
power
that.
Couple,
like, it's just like, okay, the contribution of those two human beings was just like transformative for our city. So in thinking about them as examples of servant leadership, which is also really important to Liberation Academy, Freedom Schools, culture, thinking about what energy, what spirit do we want to try to capture in order to like codify that into our curriculum and use as the moving energy that was going to propel this curriculum forward. They were it. So that's how we got LeCount-Catto.
I love that. The power couple of their time. Making stuff happen out in these streets. Okay.
For sure.
Real one. About it. All right.
All day. Like not playing. Stay strapped. Like stayed.
I'm with it. Brandon, can you talk to us? What are some of the highlights of this curriculum? What should folks be excited about seeing in LeCount-Catto curriculum?
I think the thing that I get most excited about, and I hope other people do, is that the opportunities to really realize like it's feasible for you to be an educator. It's necessary for you to be an educator. It's so often not a desire amongst our folk to become an educator. But this curriculum breaks down how and why. And one of my favorite parts of the curriculum is going through all explaining on an analyzing systems on a systemic level, explaining all the hurdles of trying to become an educator of color in terms of like, first of all, going through the right program, right? Going through the certifications and the tests and all these things that you didn't know, like paying for tests, what the tests are exactly going to be about, how to lean into them, how to go around them potentially in terms of finding other more meaningful, more authentic ways, less hurdle-based ways into the profession, really breaking that down so that way they can see what's coming and be prepared for it, if not like literally, but like psychologically knowing what's coming down the pike. Another favorite part of the curriculum for me is helping them understand that leading how information is disseminated, provided, and cultivated is not a European monopoly, right? Like thinking about having folks be exposed to Greg Carr, Asa Hilliard, Lisa Delpit, who's our boy Hans Thiongo, right? Is that how you pronounce his name?
Oh, and Ngugi wa Thiong'o, yes.
Yep. Folks like that in high school, like they're being, first of all, some of these folk, this is the beautiful thing about working on the curriculum. Some of these folk that people bring in as they contribute didn't even know, right? Like, but like for a 16-year-old to figure out who these people are, what these thoughts are about, and see how like other people outside of white people think about these things in different ways and in more innovative ways in many regards. Like it's important. Like we've been teaching the earth for a very long time, and they're going to be able to kind of see that in themselves when they embrace the curriculum, but also see it in a way where they know they have to embrace what they have legacies of, but in this Western context, right? So they get the right tools to navigate and think about what it means to be reclaim your birthright or your ancestral right to education, being educated and being an educator in this Western society.
Yeah,
listen,
Brandon,
go ahead.
Yeah, that is the note that you're ending on, like that, the piece about separate or like just being able to remove or just be provided an alternative to this Western context that we are surrounded by is crucial. And is, again, really core to why I think this project was so important. A lot of the time, especially when talking about the history of education, even in America, like even if we don't go back to like the people who's just started writing, like came together and was like, let me put this down on paper. Even if we come to the state of the Americas, there are people who were intentionally thinking about and developing curriculum. Like people, Carter G. Woodson is not really talked about when we think about the history of education, and Du Bois and his curriculum and his work and his studies. He gives a slice. In 1903, he wrote a book, and double consciousness is what we hear about Du Bois. Like, but there's so much more, and the ways that these people have contributed to our educational legacy in the United States is something that people have nearly no awareness of. And that's something that needs to change. And because when people, like, education and the process of education is a socializing tool. Yeah. You learn how to bring up the next generation of whoever you're trying to raise up and teach them how to take their place in society through whatever you're teaching them. Exactly. So like if what you are teaching them is that their place in society is subordinate through whatever stories you choose to tell, like, oh, y'all were enslaved or y'all didn't do anything important or of value until we encountered y'all and brought y'all here, and now you have a story.
Listen,
like that changes the lens, and that's an intentional. War out here. Exactly, that's an intentional construction. So being able to provide an alternative to that is something that's really important, and is a cultural front that needs to be fought. That we need more people to engage in, like, thinking critically and engaging those not often told stories, angles, intellectuals, theorists. All of those people need to be lifted up, and that's something that I'm really thankful for through this curriculum. That's something that we try to do.
For sure, and it really goes to and aligns to show how your curriculum aligns with a liberatory education.
Yeah,
how we're having these conversations and saying that we didn't even know some of these people. We like grown, well-read, degreed up adults, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But I could tell you who George Washington is. I could tell you who Benjamin Franklin is. I could tell you who Thomas Jefferson is. I could tell you who Andrew Jackson is. I can even tell you who Buchanan is. People are like, who's that? Like one of the presidents, right?
Right.
But I can tell you about all these great white men. Right?
Exactly.
But I can't list the same amount of own people. And even when you talk to high school students, right? They can name the same Black people, literally the same Black people that they learn about or lift up every month during Black History Month, right? So everybody going to talk about good old Martin Luther King.
Yes.
And the shame is that my man Martin was dope, right?
Yes.
But because he has been watered down so much, right? But that's who people can tell you about, the watered down version of Martin Luther King, not really who he was, right? But even when you go back to who you know for the slaves, they're going to say Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth, right? Like that's the two slaves that they're going to keep on talk about Sister Harriet and Sister Sojourner. Like there was nobody else that was slaves that did something. You know what I mean? Right. So you have those stories. And then now in modern day, you might hear a little bit, about Malcolm. Like you might, depending on what spaces you walk into. And then you even talk like, how are they talking about Malcolm, right? But there are so many other names, as you guys are stating, that needed to be lifted up in our ancestral history, in our modern day history, and then even in our future, right? Like just that repertoire that needs to be built up and spoken about to our children is just not. And I think that our curriculum provides an avenue for that to happen. I would love to hear from you guys how you feel like the curriculum aligns with a liberatory education.
Yeah, just to continue the thread that we're on, I sometimes do this exercise with the students where I talk to them. Well, I just introduce Hercules. Like, do y'all know who Hercules is? And sometimes I show like the Disney movie thing and they're like, oh yeah, Hercules, Pegasus, Zeus, la la la. They do the whole thing, right? So I asked them, I found, this illustration of Isis, Osiris, and his wife. Sorry, her name is escaping me, but Heru, Isis, Osiris, and Heru. So I show them this, and I'm like, do y'all know who this is and who this story is? Like, no, they look Egyptian, da 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 da. So then I show them a picture of the Lion King, and I'm like, well, can you tell me this story? They're like, oh yeah, it was the crazy uncle and the dad, and they tried to kill the baby, and the mom Sarabi was there, and I was like, this story, like if you've ever heard the story of Isis and Osiris, is essentially like the story of the Lion King, like that trilogy there, that story about the crazy uncle, that's set, he comes, tries to destroy the family. But the fact that you don't hear, like they could have told the story of the Lion King, which is also a Malian story, epic, which is called literally like Sundiata, the Lion King. But that story is an oral tradition that was passed down through African intentional, like intellectual culture, but is told in a way that obscures that reality. It's almost like our intellectual
disconnects it straight from history.
Exactly.
And minimizes our culture to some animals and characters.
Exactly. That's it. That's exactly all we are. But like when you think about like who the intellectuals are, the European representation is rampant. There's a Socratic seminar, like Latin and democracy, and like how they gave us the Pythagorean theorem. Like they're the geniuses that gave us the world in the palm of their hands.
They're the genius who stole it.
Exactly.
From Africans.
Right. But that's all been obscured. So I think back to the question that you asked, like, how does this contribute to a liberatory education? Some of the things that our students are representing is that you think of yourself differently when you have the opportunity to connect to an intellectual inheritance that is specifically yours. And it's deeper than just being proud of yourself, because we were collecting data and pride came up as something that we were getting. But there's also this thread about the sense of belonging that young people get when they begin to conceptualize who they are and who they belong to. The fact that they belong to each other and the fact that they belong to all these other people who have done things that we can't even really conceive of, really, under circumstances that I don't know if all of us will be able to survive. So, and even before that, like, you have to create something that wasn't there before. And then for it to be something that lasts throughout time is just phenomenal energy. But all that energy is ours, And when you can tap into that, that's the liberatory experience. Like, you become unstoppable. You become a force to be reckoned with. And that's something that young people are really connecting to and taking home as a part of what Liberation Academy does. Like, I am connected to this. I belong to this. I am a part of this, and I can carry it on. Like, I can take the next steps that are necessary in order for everybody else to be able to experience a more liberated future. So that's what it all means to me.
Brendan, anything on how this curriculum aligns to liberatory education?
Yeah, I think not just introducing, but like routinely exercising what it means to be a liberatory educator, right? I think in terms of really baking in the why to be a teacher, the frameworks we use from Black educator activists of antiquity up to now, really just baking that in, letting them know that you are teaching for the advancement of your community, right? This is a way and a reason to teach that is not new, that is ancestral and is your birthright, right? And that's evident again through the frameworks we use, the thought leaders we introduce kids to through the curriculum, and the assessments we ask them to do and build out. One off the top of my head is thinking about it was like a shortened light version of like an amicus brief, right? Where they have to explain
Policy brief.
Thank you. They have to kind of explain the hows and the whys of the inequities that they experience in their particular school districts, right? Looking at particular court cases, like ones in Detroit and I think one in California, around where the school district community actually sued their respective school districts for failing to deliver on equitable education, right? Helping them think about the role literacy and developing literacy in the English language has played in the prohibition and the emancipation of us to be able to access things and articulate and discern and think through things in our experience in America. That's a unit. So it's really centered in community advancement, and then not only that, it's centered in collaboration, right? Like 75% of the time they're doing something in this curriculum, they're doing so together, right? They're working towards liberatory centered objectives, assessment goals, which are also informed by LCC standards that are around or that are centered in liberatory practices. Everything that they're working on toward those particular frameworks and standards and assessment goals, they're frequently collaborating, right? So I would say that these are the things that make the curriculum liberatory.
So rich, so deep. I really enjoy hearing about all these things that are being placed in front of our young people and our next generation of future educators and leaders, because it's needed. We have to unlearn, right? We are indoctrinated in a certain culture. So creating innovative liberatory curriculum is what's going to help that kind of awakening to get our young people together, to help them learn to work together towards all of our liberation. Thank you, everybody, for listening to today's episode of Building the Black Educator Pipeline podcast. We really enjoyed our time with Brendan and Ansharaye. But sometimes time is just not our friend. We wish we had a lot more time to dig in. This has been such a rich and powerful conversation about liberatory education. We'll be inviting Brendan and Ansharaye back for a future episode to really dive in and talk about how students, facilitators, district partners, and universities are really experiencing the curriculum. To learn more about CBED's LeCount-Catto Curriculum and the happenings with our org, please visit us at www.thecenterblacked.org. Please don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. We'll see you back for another episode of Building the Black Educator Pipeline podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Peace, everybody.